Now, this is something that I found to be very, very confusing. It's Trump himself. He's been contradicting himself this entire time. Well, not this entire time, but for most of the time that this conflict in Iran has been going on. So we've got this headline here from the AP. It says, Trump's mixed messages on Iran, winding down the war and easing sanctions, but adding more troops. I mean, fair point. And it's just something I've noticed. You know, he's like, oh, the war is going very well, sends more troops over to different bases. I think that Trump is saying that, you know, things are going well, the war is over, stuff like that, because he understands that constitutional precedent set by the Supreme Court of the United States has sort of dictated that Trump has more or less about a 60-day window in which to perform military actions. And at the end of that time, the troops must come home, or he has to go to Congress and get a declaration of war. Now, that's largely based on SCOTUS rulings that don't necessarily adhere to the written text of the Constitution. If you just look at the Constitution, it's pretty clear that Congress has the ability and the authorization to declare war. Trump can't basically do a de facto war constitutionally, internationally, but what Trump is doing is relatively within the bounds of what has been allowed of U.S. presidents so far. Now, with Trump saying things like the war is over, or we're doing a great job, or we're almost finished, etc., that does leave the narrative door open for him to be like, oh, you know what? It just happens to be day 58, and you know what? Mission accomplished. Everybody go home. So I think Trump is kind of like leaving the narrative structure for that sort of argument open. Now, I do think that Trump wants to end things before then, because he doesn't want to be kind of put on a shot clock, and he wants to be able to end the conflict on his terms. I just don't know if that's, likely to happen. I'm not, one to say that Iran is the type of country that can absolutely demolish the United States of America, but they're putting up a bit of a fight because, they do have an arsenal of missiles and other types of weapons. It's not like Iran is like, Ukraine or something, which, by the way, Ukraine has been putting up a pretty big fight as well. But, Iran, they, for their size, they can pack punches. So, I could absolutely see Iran finding a way to make the conflict last long enough so that by day 60, they're still standing, and they have good control of their part of the region, right? Stuff like the Strait of Hormuz, control over, areas in the region such as that. I could very easily see Iran keeping the conflict lasting long enough to where the U.S. has to step away, and then Iran then has the narrative ability to be like, haha, we won. Even though, at what cost, right? You lost like a dozen leaders. They all got killed and stuff. A bunch of the missile stockpiles and weaponry got destroyed. At the end of the day, if you get the other side to leave, then there is a narrative there where it's like, we won because they left, right? So I think it's probably something that the IRGC is considering too. But anyways, let's go through this article. President Donald Trump frequently contradicts himself, and sometimes in the same speech, social media post, or even sentence. In the past 24 hours, he sent a torn of mixed signals about the Iran war that raised more questions about the direction of the conflict and his administration's strategy. Within the space of a few hours Friday, Trump said he was considering winding down the war. His administration confirmed it was sending more troops to the Middle East, and in an effort to lessen the economic impact on global energy markets, the United States lifted sanctions on some Iranian oil for the first time in decades, relieving some of the pressure that Washington traditionally has used as leverage. The confusing combination of actions deepens a sense among Trump critics that there is no clear long-term strategy for the war the U.S. and Israel launched against Iran. Now in its fourth week, the war remains on an unpredictable path, and a credible endgame is unclear, even as the global economy is being roiled. Winding down the war. After another rough day in the financial markets, Trump said Friday afternoon on a social media network, "We are getting very close to meeting our objectives as we consider winding down our great military efforts in the Middle East." Trump contended the U.S. has adequately degraded Iranian naval, missile, and industrial capacity and prevented Tehran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. The Republican president then suggested the U.S. could pull out of the conflict without stabilizing the Strait of Hormuz, the channel through which about 1/5 of the world's oil supply travels. The strait has been ravaged by Iranian missile, drone, and mine attacks during the World War. I will say this. Clearing out and stabilizing the Strait of Hormuz has to be the top priority of the military conflict moving forward. And here's the reason why. You know, they say it right here. With the Strait of Hormuz, whoever has control of that controls up to 1/5 of the U.S.'s oil supply. Since this conflict has started, gas prices in the United States have been skyrocketing. You know the reason why? It's because of stuff like Iran bombing anyone trying to send oil through the Strait of Hormuz. Donald Trump's number one objective, I think, should be, above all, with this conflict, not leaving the situation internationally worse than it was when he started. And a really easy way to fumble that is not by securing control of the Strait of Hormuz. You know, we gotta find a way to fix this issue. I'm not 100% sure what this is. We could send U.S. military boats out to the Strait of Hormuz, but they would probably get shot at as well. I do think that you might want to take a look at where those missiles are getting launched from, and then, you know, destroy those missile sites. I think that is probably something that America has on the table, to be honest. But, you know, this is a multi-factor strategy, right? You have not just missiles, but you've also got drones. And you've also got mine attacks. So there are a lot of things that you have to factor in. And I don't think, honestly, you know, with Iran kind of feeling a lot of pain lately with America in Israel's attacks on them, Iran kind of wants to retaliate and make other people feel pain as well. There's no easier way to do that than like just ruining the Strait of Hormuz. So unless the world is going to abandon the Strait of Hormuz, which would certainly not help gas prices internationally, frankly, the only way to get Iran to back down is to surrender or just destroy Iran, right? Or at least destroy, you know, literally all of their military capabilities. I don't know how you take on a multi-factor threat like this. There are probably people more educated in as far as, you know, military strategy than I, but this just seems like a difficult thing to do, unless you sort of convinced Iran to, you know, remove the mines, you know, call back their drones. This is going to be a really difficult thing for us to face moving forward. The Strait of Hormuz will have to be guarded and policed as necessary by other nations who use it. The United States does not, Trump wrote. But in another contradiction, he said that the U.S. would help if asked, but it shouldn't be necessary once Iran's threat is eradicated. While oil that traverses the strait is usually bound for Asia or other places rather than North America, the chaos still affects the United States. Oil is bought and sold globally, so a shortage for oil for Asian countries leads to bidding up prices on oil sold to companies in America too. Now, I will say, American oil companies must be pretty happy right now because they're making a lot more money off of their oil. That fact, coupled with an Israeli strike on Iran's gas fields and an Iranian retaliation that crippled a major terminal to ship liquefied natural gas from Qatar, helped tank U.S. equity markets Friday, with the S&P dropping 1.5%. Oh, hey, you know what? I think the S&P is down. Does that mean that we can start caring about Jeffrey Epstein? I think we can start caring about Jeffrey Epstein again, which is very, very crazy, you know? You know, that now that the S&P is down 1.5%, we can start caring about Jeffrey Epstein. Anyways, there was also a sharp increase in U.S. fuel prices. More military might to the Middle East. Even as Trump said the U.S. was close to winding down the war, the administration announced it was sending 3 more warships to the Middle East with about 2,500 additional Marines. It was the second time in the week that the administration said it was deploying more forces to the conflict. The military said some 50,000 are supporting the war effort. Trump has ruled out sending in ground troops, though his administration has hinted at a possible deployment of special forces or similar units. The Marines being sent to the region are an expeditionary unit designed for quick amphibious landings, but the deployment does not mean a ground invasion is certain. Analysts have suggested that it may require the presence of U.S. forces on the ground to immediately secure the strait. The surge in troops came just a day after news emerged that the Pentagon was seeking an additional $200 billion from Congress to fund the war. That extraordinarily high number does not suggest that the war was being wound down. You know, one thing I find interesting is that these news articles are referring to this as a war when technically this is not classified as such, right? Congress alone has the authority to declare war, so I do find this interesting. Sanctions on Iranian oil sales. The administration said it would lift sanctions on the sale of Iranian oil, provided it was already at sea as of Friday. The move was an attempt to help lower skyrocketing energy prices by allowing freer sale of oil that Iran has let pass through the strait. It also extends a financial lifeline to the Iranian government that Trump is targeting. His administration has tried other methods to lower oil prices. It has tapped the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is not great, because those take time to replenish, but I understand the move, and lifted sanctions on some Russian oil. Yet Brent crude remained at $112 per barrel Friday, and analysts say that oil prices are likely to remain high for months, regardless of the next steps in the war. The Iranian oil eventually would have reached another country, but now the United States and its allies can bid on it as well, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent wrote on X. At present, sanctioned Iranian oil is being hoarded by China on the cheap, Bessent wrote. By temporarily unlocking this existing supply for the world, the United States will bring approximately 140 million barrels of oil to global markets, expanding the amount of worldwide energy and helping to relieve the temporary pressures on supply caused by Iran. Even if this is true, this is cope, because China hoarding oil would not be new if this is something that's really been happening. So, you know, even if it's true, this is cope, and this is not the real reason why they're doing this. I think the real reason why they're doing this is that prices are too high. They're trying to get prices lower. Let's see here. While 150 million barrels may seem like a lot, that is only a couple of days worth of oil on the global market. Patrick DeHaan, the head of petroleum analysis at GasBuddy, a U.S. fuel tracking service, said he does not expect the temporary suspension to have a major impact on gas prices. The de facto closure of the strait has a much greater effect, he said. Prices will likely still continue to rise so long as the strait remains silent, DeHaan said. And the contradictions in the position were obvious in Bessent's post announcing the move, which labeled Iran the head of the snake of global terrorism. He said the administration would take steps to prevent Tehran from crashing in on the sales, but it was unclear how that would be done. Even among some Republicans, the contradictions triggered rare public skepticism. Bombing Iran with one hand and buying Iranian oil with the other, Representative Nancy Mace of South Carolina posted on X Saturday. I will say this, look, a lot of people don't do this, but when it comes to statements that are made publicly, don't follow those nearly as closely as what the state actually decides to do. This is something that I do all the time with free speech, right? The UK, Canada, and EU all claim they have free speech, but then they have extremely harsh hate speech policies, which fly in the face of the entire concept of free speech. You know, it doesn't matter whether or not you say that you have free speech if you don't actually have it. So likewise, it doesn't matter if Trump says that the war is over when he is ratcheting up, and bolstering the military infantry at certain locations all across the world. So don't listen to Donald Trump on his rhetoric regarding the state of things and how things are going. Pay attention to the actual army men on the ground.